Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. We are, as anticipated, going to be talking about the latest with Hurricane Lee as it gets ever so closer to New England, specifically the Gulf of Maine and the Bay of Fundy, which is located right in this circle. We'll also be talking about the latest with Tropical Depression 15, which was just named as of today and is expected to become Tropical Storm Nigel by the time we get to likely this weekend into early next week. So really this video is going to be doing three things. Number one, we're going to talk about the latest with Hurricane Lee, the potential hazards that are facing New England, the Northeast, and back towards our friends in the Canadian provinces. We'll also be talking about the latest with the aforementioned Tropical Depression 15 and where it's expected to go. Are there implications to the United States and Bermuda? We'll talk about that as well. And finally, as you notice here in the far right-hand corner of the screen, you see a very active Sahara, a lot of convection coming off the African coast and even getting as far west as, say, Central Atlantic Ocean. So we're going to break down everything in relation to the tropics during today's video. I will say if you do enjoy today's video, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends. And I will also remind you guys that once we hit 1,000 subscribers, we will be doing a live stream where I will, not me personally, but somebody will shave off my entire head. I will be completely bald, and all of my hair will be donated to St. Bardrick's. St. Bardrick's is a wonderful organization that collects hair from both men and women to serve those that are suffering from pediatric cancer that have lost their hair. So I'm very excited to do that. As you can tell, I have so much hair on the top of my head. I need to get rid of it. It's a bird's nest, so I want to make sure it goes to a good cause. But once again, once we reach 1,000 subscribers, hopefully by the end of October, I will do that on a live stream and do it for a very, very good cause. So if you know anybody that has not subscribed yet, if you yourself are watching this video and are one of those people that have not subscribed to the channel, please do yourself a favor and do so. It is completely free. And like I said, once we hit 1,000 subscribers is when we will do the live stream where all this hair is coming off and it's going to a great charity and a great cause. That all said, let's get right into today's video. All right, folks. Well, after a shower and a wardrobe change, we are back here with the additional rest of the video. And we're going to begin first by taking a look at our water vapor imagery. This is a map that we've been looking at for the last couple of days. And to be quite honest with you, it really puts things into perspective as far as Hurricane Lee's weakening is concerned. So take a look at a couple things. First of all, you see this dry plume that's coming off the mid-Atlantic coastline. That's actually backed northwesterly flow from our cold front that's actually pushing through and affecting the outskirts of the western periphery with Hurricane Lee. In addition to that, though, not only do you have that dry component, but look what's happening here. It's pulling up a very large plume of dry air into the center of the storm. We talked about this yesterday as well, the idea that Hurricane Lee has really taken on a lot of dry air intrusion. And if you remember, dry air is a strong inhibitor against deep convection. So the reason why we're not really seeing much of an eye wall or really a center at all, let alone a southern half of the system, is because it's really pulling in a lot of dry air here with this system. Not only is it dealing with that, but as we've talked about as well, it is dealing with quite a bit of wind shear. Whenever you have a cold front that digs south like this and you have dry air being pulled up to the north, well, you have the dry air like we talked about, but not only do you have the dry air by the mid-Atlantic, but you also have wind shear that the storm is dealing with. So it's dealing with the dry air like we've talked about, but it's also dealing with some pretty strong upper to lower level bulk shear. Those two combined, those factors really are the driving force behind why we're seeing Hurricane Lee rapidly weaken. Coupled with the fact that as it increases its latitude, another thing that we've also talked about here on the channel is as it increases its northerly latitude, it is decreasing its sea surface temperatures to work with. That being said, I want to just drive home this point before we even get started with the rest of the video. If you are in the areas of New England, Nova Scotia, particularly in the Gulf of Maine and the Bay of Fundy, just because this system is weakening down to a Category 1 borderline tropical storm doesn't mean that you're not going to still feel the effects of this thing. We have a very large wind field, and I know we've touched on this the last couple of videos. We also have to deal with some pretty significant storm surge in some spots, as well as some heavy rainfall and some strong damaging winds. this is certainly not done. There is a reason why we have hurricane watches and tropical storm warnings all up and down the New England seaboard. It is for that very reason. The system is still going to have an impact as it continues to move northward in the next 24 hours. Now, here is the latest drops on. This is actually something that we pulled from yesterday's video, but this is the latest on it. If you recall from yesterday's video, we had a lot of dry air in a couple of spots. The first one being the 500 millibar level, which is really our jet stream level. And then we also had a lot at the upper level jet at our 200 millibar pressure level reference, and as well as the surface. It was sort of split into three. Now, we've noticed a bit of a change here in the last 24 hours, or really the last time we did a video, is that the temperatures near the core have increased slightly. And we're assuming that this was near the center that the drop zone was positioned. It may not be in the eye of the system, but it was likely somewhere close. We see temperatures towards the surface 28.2 degrees Celsius. Notice what your relative humidity looks like, right? So you actually have here, in terms of that, you have 93, 95, 85, 82. Actually a lot higher than what we saw yesterday. If you take a look at just our overall profile, you have a lot more saturation in the mid-levels of this system. That being said, you still do have quite a bit of dry air aloft, 4%, 8%, and even getting down towards the surface, our relative humidity really starts to drop off once we get below 850. Remember that 850 millibars, guys, is a kilometer above the surface. So as we decrease that and get ever so closer to the surface, then your relative humidity, as we're seeing, is starting to decrease. However, our temperature is increasing as we get down towards the surface, so that is something of note. But the whole point of this, and I think one thing that we can really conclude from this latest drop zone, is that it is still fighting off dry air. We just established that on our upper level water vapor imagery, and we've also established that here on our drop zone. Still really battling a lot of that in some of our levels. Slightly improved here in the mid-levels of the system, but nonetheless still fighting off some dry air at all different components, whether we're talking about the upper level jet or getting down towards the surface. Now, here is the latest, just looking at a zoomed in infrared satellite of Hurricane Lee. And the one thing of note is we have seen, again, some improvements in the mid-levels for our saturated air column, or our profile. And that is kind of leading to some more robust convection near the center. Robust? I can't talk today. We have more robust convection near the center. And you actually see that right here based on our infrared. Keep in mind, if you take a look at the right-hand corner of your screen, this color table is indicative of cloud tops. So if we see really bright colors, we're talking about very deep convection, cloud tops that are going tens of thousands of feet high through the troposphere. And as we look at the map here, we do have some additional development in the northwestern quadrant as well as towards the center. But the one thing that remains, ladies and gentlemen, is that there is still a lot of dry air that is wrapping up right towards the center. And you can see it just by this whole clear slot in the southeastern portion of the system. As it moves north, it's also evicting some of that dry air, and it is seeping into the center of this system. We just saw that based on our relative humidity, how it actually decreases with height, nearly 60-59% relative humidity. So it's starting to get drier and drier towards the surface level of this system. So that has been the main storyline for the last 24 to 48 hours with Hurricane Lee. Again, it is starting to show some robust convection here and the beginning of it trying to get its act together with whatever it can do as far as deep convection is concerned, but it still is having a very difficult time doing that on a more broader scale. Now, here is the latest GFS. This is just showing the reflectivity of it all. You notice that as we get closer in the next 24 hours, the GFS does have it out at a 965 pressure, and you also see your wind barbs really expanding far out away from the center. This is a topic that we've been talking about here on the channel the last few days. And what happens is, and I'll remind folks again, cold air to the north, warm air to the south creates a pretty potent horizontal temperature gradient. Our low pressure systems in the northern hemisphere love that. And what that will essentially do is expand its baroclinicity and thereby expand its wind field. So there's a reason why we have tropical storm warnings in effect for areas far west of the system by an order of 100 to 200 miles. for folks in Cape Cod and points northward along the New England coast. The reason why is because you're going to have a northerly wind, a pretty potent northerly wind, that's going to extend down into Cape Cod, where we're expecting to see some of the worst storm surge in New England being in this region. And again, you can say why, because we have that curvature effect of the land, right? It kind of makes a bowl near Cape Cod. If you have a northerly wind brushing against that, that's actually going to intensify your storm surge. So we could be talking about 5 to 10 foot storm surge near Cape Cod. So if you're wondering why there's those tropical storm warnings out, a lot of that having to do with the storm surge and the damaging winds that will come of it, even from the north side of it. Even if you're far displaced to the west from the center, the impacts will extend all the way into New England. Even if you're not living in Nova Scotia or Maine, you will certainly feel the effects of this. So just wanted to make that point, and this map really drives it home, right? So the worst of our storm surge, or our wave height, we should say, is going to be out in the ocean. If you're ever wondering why that's the case, and again, I apologize if I can't talk today. I feel like I keep twisting my tongue every time I talk, so I apologize. The reason why we have really high wave heights out away from land is because we're not dealing with friction. There is no land. It's not brushing up against anything. So because the wind is just moving over water, that's causing more upwelling and for those waves to become higher in height. Once we start to interact with land and it does move on to shore, that's when you start to see a little bit of a decrease in some of those wave heights. So for example, if you take a look here at Nova Scotia, it shows about anywhere between 21 to 29 foot storm surge. As we get up to the shoreline, though, it's probably going to be slightly less than that. But that being said, 15 to 20 foot wave heights would not be out of the question for Nova Scotia because the center of the system is going to be moving over Nova Scotia. So it would make sense as to why we're seeing some of those amplified wave heights being confined to the center. That being said, look how far west that our wave heights extend. They go as far west as the aforementioned Cape Cod and the Gulf of Maine, getting back towards New Hampshire. This is very significant because, again, even if you're far to the west of the center, we're still talking about anywhere between 5 to 10 foot storm surge out near Cape Cod. And as we get closer to the coastlines of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, you do see that slightly decrease, but still anywhere between 1 to 5 foot storm surge near the coastline. As we get towards the Gulf of Maine, you can see those wave heights be anywhere between 5 to 10 plus feet. So there are tropical storm warnings for a large swath, as we talked about, of New England. A lot of that having to do with these wave heights. We cannot joke around with this, guys. If there are beach hazard statements in effect, which I wouldn't be surprised if there are at the moment, you need to take those seriously. Turn around. Don't drown is usually one for flash flooding. That's a message they use. But please stay off the beaches, okay? You don't want to be on the beaches. It is very dangerous to life-threatening conditions. I mentioned turn around, don't drown. I'm also talking about the flooding threat, which we will talk about here right now. So I mentioned two messagings that I want to get out to folks. The first one being turn around, don't drown with our flooding threat here that we have, but also please stay off the beaches. If there's any red flag, or not red flag warnings, if there's any, hazards or notifications from local officials to stay off the beach, you need to take that seriously. Guys, please do not become a statistic. You do not want to lose your life to something like rip currents or high tide or any of that. I digress. Let's take a look now at the flooding potential. So this is looking at a model called the WRF. It is one of the convective allowing models we use in meteorology. But the general consensus, even if you pull from the WRF, if you're pulling from the NAM, the GFS, any model you want to look at, it is showing a pretty broad general consensus of precipitation totals. Really, it comes out to anywhere between 3 to 6 inches of rain for this corridor of Maine. So particularly in southeastern Maine and then getting back up towards the upper peripheries of the international border near Caribou. 3 to 6 inch rainfall totals are certainly at play. Pretty high model confidence in that solution. Would not be surprised to see that. The other thing I wouldn't be surprised to see is even though we're expecting 3 to 6 inch rainfall totals, it is not out of the question to see rainfall rates anywhere between 1 to even 2 inches per hour. And the reason why is because these tropical storms bring a lot of moisture with them. And so that has to be precipitated in some way or fashion. And so because they're bringing on a lot of saturation, a lot of moisture, and very high precipitable water values in the case of Hurricane Lee, would not be out of the question to see some pretty intense rainfall rates on the initial arrival of Hurricane Lee once we get into your Saturday and Sunday. Now, here is the latest track on Hurricane Lee. Not much change over the last couple of days. Models pretty much have this locked in at this point. We are expecting a direct hit to Nova Scotia. We have hurricane watches as well as tropical storm warnings for much of the coastline of Nova Scotia, going all the way back into the Bay of Fundy and the Gulf of Maine. As I mentioned here a couple times during this video, we have tropical storm warnings also in effect for a large swath of the New England coastline. As a matter of fact, it's pretty much everybody along the New England coastline, from Rhode Island getting all the way back up into the coast of Maine. A lot of that, again, having to do with the damaging winds as well as the potential storm surge that could impact many of you in this region. So, as I've mentioned a couple times during this video as well, please make sure you heed the advice of local officials. If they ask you to evacuate, take it seriously. So far, I have yet to see those, but things will change in the next 24 hours. So if any of those notifications do go out, please take those seriously and take all the proper precautions necessary to protect you and others. So that is pretty much it for Hurricane Lee. We will continue to monitor that system over that 24 to 48 hour period. But even despite Hurricane Lee, there is more activity happening right now in the Atlantic. I had mentioned this, I believe, several days ago, but I really mean when I say it. The Atlantic is really starting to wake up here in the last few days. Look at all this convection extending off the coast of Africa. You see it even extending into the Saharas, and then you have another plume of convection well off the coast of Africa, and that is our newly established Tropical Depression 15, which is expected to become Tropical Storm Nigel by the time we get into this weekend into early next week. So even if we're talking about Nigel, which we'll touch on here in a second, the one thing that I really want to drive home is that we are not done with hurricane season. I know a lot of folks out there look at the overall timeline of hurricane season and see, oh, well, we're past September, we're past peak hurricane season. Surely things must be calming down. Well, no, they're not. As a matter of fact, we're actually starting to pick things up here. This is an area that is very much away from dry air, very much away from much wind shear that's affecting this convection. So this environment is primed for additional development as we go through the next week. And we certainly have to turn our attention here in the short term to Nigel. What I'm not going to show here on the channel for now is the path of Hurricane Nigel, or excuse me, what will eventually be Tropical Storm Nigel as we go forward into early next week. And the reason why is because there is a lot of uncertainty with the pathing of Nigel. And by the way, I do apologize for that mix-up. It is not a hurricane yet. Let the record show it is still Tropical Depression 15. We do expect it, though, according to this map, to eventually be Tropical Storm Nigel by the time we get to your Saturday and Sunday. But again, the reason why I'm not showing the map to you guys of that spaghetti plot that we usually do talk about is because there is a lot of variability with that map, and you can even see that dignified in our strength projections. Look at this spread once we get out to 84 hours, anywhere between a Cat 4 and a tropical storm, telling us that there's a lot of uncertainty about the strength of this system going forward. There still is a lot of question marks in relation to what will eventually become Tropical Storm Nigel. And we will, of course, keep you monitored and posted on what happens with that as we move forward in time. So far, Tropical Depression 15 is not showing any immediate impacts to the United States and the coastlines. There is the potential that it may get very close to Bermuda, so we're going to have to continue to monitor this system as we go forward into early next week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I had a lot of tongue twisters and bloopers all throughout this video, so thank you guys so much for your patience. I guess I didn't get enough sleep last night, apparently. because for some reason I just can't talk today. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Don't forget, if we hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of October, we will be doing a charity stream for St. Baldrick's, and I will be shaving off my head, and that will be donated to those who are suffering from pediatric cancer. A very, very great cause, and I will continue to plug that here over the next month. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do. It's going to go to a very good cause. It's free to subscribe, and I'm very much looking forward to doing that because I have to get rid of this hair, guys. I really do. So anyway, appreciate you guys so much. Thank you all for your continued support, and we will see you on the next weather video.